Merry Christmas. So, something I've been thinking about is how, and this is kind of a novel idea, how society and everyone over like 30 and 40 and the church, right? How the older generations and the religious institutions, they think that young men are losers. They think that young single guys are losers. Now, they would never say that. They're not going to say that, right? How could you? But that's what they think internally. That's what they see when they see you in your mid 20s as a guy and you're working at home and you're working out and you're just doing your own thing, maybe playing some video games and watching some movies in your free time. They see you as a loser, as the problem. Even people, you'd hear that message maybe from the Democrats or the liberal movement, but it's in the conservative party too. All these big politicians, right? Everyone, they see you as losers. I've had conversations with church leaders, and I'm not going to get into specifics, but the general idea, right? Once I talked with these church leaders, okay, I had a conversation fairly recently with one where the bottom message, the underlying message, which he didn't say it outright, okay, because we were talking about things. So, but the general message that I got from him was that if you're not married as a single guy, that's because you're a loser and you can't get a wife. And I'm not even stretching it. Like, it wasn't verbatim, but it wasn't too far from being verbatim. Okay? And this was someone that is a prominent leader of youth and preaches sometimes in a big church near me. I've had conversations with my previous pastor about certain passages. And essentially, what I came to find out was he interpreted certain passages that talk about men and women in the church and how there should be differences. His viewpoint, though he will not say it in the pulpit, right? And I'm not going to call him out by name, but in this conversation, the general idea I got from him, and it was fairly overt, was that he took a more feminist approach to it, an egalitarian approach. Now, he knows he can't say that in the pulpit because he'd very quickly lose congregants or people coming to the church, but that was our little conversation. That was not in the church. It was just separate. That was the idea. I've been spoken to by people in the church, by people in my family, right? All of these are older, by the way. They're all our parents' generation and older. So, like X and I'd say past millennials. So, like X and boomers. That the reason I myself am not married and don't have kids is same reason. It's on me. I haven't picked myself up by my bootstraps, and it's all on me. It's my fault. And they won't say it, but I've had enough conversations and I can kind of get an idea of what they're thinking. They think I'm a loser, right? Just like they think you're a loser. And these aren't even like, these are subconscious. These are demeanors that they have, prejudices that they have, ideas they have, how they think of you, right? That they couldn't verbalize it. They would never say like, "Oh yeah, we think you guys are all losers," especially not in the church, right? But that is what they think because that's what they've been taught to think growing up. That if you're in that situation, it's all your fault and you're a loser. And the more I talk about this, the more a lot of the responses I get is essentially not acknowledging that this is a vast problem, right? That we're dealing with, but it's singular to me. So oftentimes we'll have this conversation. I'll be trying to have a debate, and then their response, whether it's family, friends, or whatever, their response is usually directed at me specifically. Like, I know where you're at. I've been there before, or I can understand it'd be tough. It's like, no, you're completely missing the point. It's not about me, right? It's not about me. Because let's be honest, like, as a guy, like, if you really, really want to get married, I mean, you can probably just find someone to marry, right? Even then, really, you can't. It's tough, but there's been instances where it's like, I could force it and make this happen with this girl, right? But the general idea is that there is a huge epidemic, a problem with men and women and how they view each other and how they view themselves. And there's just a big power imbalance between the men and women, and people aren't getting married and having kids. And whenever you bring this up, it's like the older generation or even the church, they just willfully are ignorant of it. And they just look at you as a loser. You can tell by how they respond, because the response is not a recognition. If you've had any amount of conversations, you'll know what I'm saying. It's not a recognition of what's going on. It's like, oh yeah, we have a problem. I wish I would have realized this sooner. No, it's most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time it's addressed at you. At least that's what I've experienced, I guess. It's like, well, here's where I think you're going wrong. Here's where you can do better, right? Clean up the house a little bit more. I don't know, whatever. All kinds of reasons. So, the bottom line is, well, let me go over some statistics real quick, okay? Because I was doing a little bit of research, and I'm thinking, what if the problem is just me, right? What if nothing has changed? Women are the same. Women are just as great as they used to be. Men are just, in similar positions. They're not disenfranchised. Everything's the same, okay? So let's assume that. Maybe it is my fault. But when you look at America, when you look at the world and what's going on in it, you'll find out that's not the case. Things are not the same. Far from it, they're extremely different than they used to be. So, right off the bat, birth rates have dropped dramatically. And of course, birth rates is going to tie to how men and women relate and eventually marry and have kids. It used to be that per 1,000 people, they were having 24 kids. Now, in 2025, that was 1950s, right? So 70 some odd years ago, they're having 24 kids per 1,000. Now it's 11 to 12 kids per 1,000 people. So it's half of what it used to be. And that was like 70 years ago. Squirrels are going crazy outside. Oh my gosh. There's like 4 of them all on a tree. Oh, 5. And I think some people may have heard of this statistic, right? We need 2.1 children per women to be a sustainable population. So the idea is that every woman over the course of her life, on average, because some women won't have kids and some will have more, but women in general on average need to have 2.1 kids over the course of their life. I think the 0.1 accounts for fatality, for deaths, right? To be sustainable, not even to increase, like scripture says, be fruitful and multiply, but to be sustainable. And today, we're at 1.6. 1.6 children per woman over the course of her life. So, essentially, women aren't even reaching 2. And of course, that's an average 1.6. So a lot of them don't have kids at all. And then, so we're not sustainable anymore. Another interesting statistic, right? In 1950, the marriage rate, so the amount of households headed by a married couple was 78 to 79%. So it was around 80% of households were headed by a married couple. That's 1950. Today, in America, that number's 47%, so less than half. We went from the majority of households and houses ran by a married couple Now it's less than half, you know? So go ahead and tell me that I'm the problem. Another statistic, married ages. I've talked to people about this too, which it's like the biggest frustration, right? So the way you get to the declining birth rates and to the declining marriage age, one way is just to not be getting married till later in life. I think, yeah, I think Charlie Kirk. I heard him say something like, if a woman doesn't have a kid by the time she's um, 30, that her chance of having a kid drops by 50% once she reaches 30. So here's an interesting statistic to go with that, right? In 1950, the average age for men and women was 22 and a half and 20 for women. So women were getting married at 20, men were getting married at 22. And that's an average. So women were getting married in their late teens, like 16, 17, 18, maybe a little bit above 20 sometimes, but the average was 20. And men was close to that. That was in the 1950s, 70 years ago. That's taboo now. They can't even conceive that someone in their late teens or 20, early 20s, would get married. They can't even conceive it, right? It's funny how far we've come. And then in 2024, so, recently, that age has gone from 30 for men and 28.6 for women. So there has been an 8-year increase on average for people getting married. People are getting married almost a decade later today. So tell me how this is a me problem. This is my problem. This is something that we as guys just need to step up, and it's our fault, right? It's because we're not, I don't know, we don't have, I'm feeling like guys, we're playing too many video games. I don't know. Like, you can keep saying that, but look at the world we live in today, right? People are getting married a decade later. And then, like I said, if the average woman, this is crazy. The average age for marriage is 28.6 for women, which to me is absurd. I can't even imagine it. My little sister got married when she was like 18 or 19. So the fact that it's 28.6 is crazy. Like, imagine over those 10 years, right? You turn 18 and you don't get married for 10 years, or you turn 16, you don't get married for 12 years or whatever. Imagine how much baggage that woman's going to accumulate over that course of dating and getting knocked up and going on her little, going in her little rebellious phase, and just like imagine the body she's going to rack up in that amount of time. But anyways, that's a side note. So the average age for women getting married is 2 years away, 1.5 years away from 30, which I don't know what statistic Charlie Kirk was quoting, but they are 1.5 years away from by their chance of having kids dropping by 50%. If these statistics are true, right? It was kind of a quick little research session, and it's like it takes, 9 months to have a kid anyway. So they're getting married on the brink of 30, which means their chances drop in half. So no wonder the birth rate is not even sustainable anymore. It's ridiculous. So tell me I'm sexist, right? Go ahead. Tell me that I'm sexist for saying women don't need to be pursuing their education, their college career, or their college and then their career, right? Tell me I'm sexist for that. Okay? You can do that all you want. And you can say that it's sexist of me to say women should have kids at a young age, should be getting married at a young age. Guys too, ideally. You can tell me I'm sexist and that's misogynistic or creepy or wrong, but realize that this is the result of not doing that. This 70-year experiment, or maybe even less than that, it probably wasn't until, a lot of these statistics are like the 50s compared to today. But this little experiment is not normal because it used to be that's what happened. We got married young, we had kids. And now this feminist experiment that the church is just toying with, they just don't care. They see it as totally normal and they're not going to talk about it. pushing our women into these colleges for 4 years and then encouraging them to pursue their career after that. Tell me, when you're not sustainable anymore and you're not having kids, and women are having kids a decade later and just getting absolutely just tons of baggage and just messed up, and households aren't ran by married couples anymore, whatever that means. They're singles or whatever. They're just together, not married. Tell me that I'm the problem, that my ideas are radical, because your 50-year experiment is not working out. And it's going to come to a crashing halt. Actually, it has to, right? By definition, if the birth rate's declining, we're all going to be extinct if we keep going in this direction. So, but my hope is that they realize it now. It's like, it doesn't take much effort. Like, I'm not on this rabbit hole just like researching stuff for hours, and I find these statistics on some dark corner of the internet. It's like, it takes a 3-second Google search. This stuff is not hidden. They can't hide it. They probably would if they could, right? But it's like, it pops up immediately. It's the AI answer. It's every single poll and research company, research institution. And, oh gosh. And they're still going to tell you, young guys, that you are the problem, that nothing is different, or maybe it's just a little bit different. Just a little bit different, but you can still just turn things around. Like that, bless Charlie Kirk's heart, but he said those, man, they're really going at it out there. They're fighting. He would sometimes talk about these issues like, hey, maybe we don't need to push women into college, and maybe we need to focus on starting a family. But then he would turn around and he said, I think I've talked about this, he said, the reason you were single as a guy, or just in general, it's your fault, completely your fault. It's up to you. And there's a certain amount of autonomy, there's a certain amount of responsibility there, for sure. But it's like, how are you going to just ignore what we just talked about? All these issues. How are you going to do that? So that's what I keep running into. I run into these people that think I'm being petty, that this older generation that just look at me like, they look at you. They look at all us young guys as losers. They do. And they think if you talk about it, you're complaining. I want people to realize this, that when the churches finally turn around and realize that they've been so secularized, so feminized with this egalitarian ideology, right? That just brings men down to women's level, and that women are just encouraged to do whatever they want, or they're not held to any type of standard, right? Because not saying anything is essentially just saying women do whatever you want. So there's no standard held for women, and just the battering of men that the men get in the church, just the beat down of don't do this, may be a respectable person for a woman to like you, don't look at porn, don't play video games, all these stuff that's somewhat good, but they're just beating the men down, and the women they're just lifting up and saying you're fantastic, right? Just giving them this ridiculous notion. Okay? I want you to know that I just hope that we remember as young guys, just as and everyone really, that when the church finally starts to change its tune, when honestly it should by now, but when these statistics, when everything that's happening becomes so overt and so on their doorstep, literally to the point of causing them to go extinct, right? I hope that people remember this older generation, these churches, these institutions, these politicians, they don't care about you. They never did. These YouTube influencers, right? These like dads with their beards, and they're talking about this verse and that verse and how to be a great man and deserve a great wife, all this bullshit. I hope we remember them. When they start to change their tune, just know they're not on your side. They realize the movement's too big. The problems are at their doorstep and too big. They'll sound like a fool, so they have to change their message to remain relevant, to remain reasonable, okay? Just know they're not your friend. A lot of these church leaders, right? A lot of these church leaders, a lot of these influencers, they're not your friend. They see you as losers to take advantage of, and it's shown and demonstrated. I know this because of one, the conversations that we have with them, the way they view us, the way they allowed the world to get to this point. Because we've only been voting for several years. They're the ones that were voting this crap into existence. They're the ones that are leading the institutions, the religious institutions. They're the ones that allowed this shit to happen. Whereas us young guys, we're like, no, we've never been on board with this. I don't need to go to seminary to realize everything in the church is wrong. And if I can realize it, you sure as hell should be able to as well. So there's no excuse. There's no excuse why the church and why these politicians and why, I mean, less of the politicians, but why it should get to this point. And I think it's going to change because this generation is waking up to it, and we're not geniuses, right? For whatever reason, the previous ones, our parents, the boomers, they've just decided to ignore it. And now we're dealt a very tough hand. And it's also shown by the fact that even today, they are still, despite all these statistics, they are still saying, you're the problem. They look at you like a loser, even though they won't say it. They just look at you like a loser, man. I have a few more statistics I'm going to go over, I guess, since I have them. So why is marriage and birth rates declining? Why? Well, it's because dating is more difficult now, right? Because dating is a precursor to getting married. So if, we're not having kids and we're not getting married, we need to trace it back to dating, which initiates all that. So what's causing the problem, right? Well, first off, 47%, so almost half of Americans say dating is hard in the last 10 years. Okay, so, get on to they can get on to you and whatnot for sounding bitter, for whatever. But, I mean, just look at the polls, man. Half of men and women, just half of them across the board, say it's more difficult in the last 10 years. So just another example of willful ignorance, right? If any of these, leaders and older people, give you a hard time or say, you just got to do this and that. It's like, dude, we're not listening to that anymore. It's hard to not sound like I'm ranting, right? Because I'm not really one to do that. I'm not really one to be pessimistic. And I definitely haven't given up, right? And I don't encourage you to by any means. But I just want people to realize there's more to this than meets the eye. There's more to this, man. People were involved in this. People were involved in letting these things happen. It didn't just happen randomly. Like, man, everything was going great, and then all of a sudden, this year, it's been tough to get in a relationship and for people to have kids. It's like, no, this has been a progressive movement that got us to this point, and there were accomplices along the way. People that didn't want to do anything about it, or they didn't care enough about the next generation that they didn't do anything about it. And there are current institutions today, which includes the church, right? Or big names and influencers that are just watching it happen, and they don't care, and they will still think of you as a loser, even if they won't say it. And, maybe eventually they'll change their tune, but let's not forget that they were those people ignoring you in the beginning. As young men, they were ignoring you. And young women for that matter, right? Because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. What's good for me is good for you. So what are some reasons why people say it's difficult? 52% of men say it's difficult to approach women. That was one of the highest reasons for the men. And 65% say it's hard to know how to behave with women and on dates since the Me Too movement. So for men, the majority, this idea of women having the freedom to say, oh, this man creeped me out, or this man did this, or he talked to me or sent me a text like this, which was what the Me Too movement was essentially, right? It wasn't like, oh, I got raped. A lot of it was just this bullshit, like, oh, he looked at me wrong, or touched me wrong, or texted me a weird text, right? So you have, as women, as a whole, and of course the institutions that encourage their voices to be heard, because we live in this egalitarian society, right? And even the church for that matter, right? Let your voice be heard, whatever. Because of that encouragement for women to be outspoken about this stuff, over half, a large majority of the guys don't even know how to approach or behave with women. They don't feel comfortable doing it. They don't know how to do it. And it's a direct result. They even say themselves, it's a direct result of this type of Me Too crap. That still goes on today. Like, it still goes on. And I don't care what women say. They're like, oh, shoot, like, how I would never do that. I don't know how it got to that point. It's like, it's just more willful ignorance, because when push comes to shove, they would do the same thing, man. They'll do the same thing. It's because their culture encourages it. Like, hey, you need to feel comfortable. Everything needs to be okay with you. And if a man's doing something wrong, you can call him out on it, right? It's this egalitarian mindset. So anyways, that's, whether that's right or wrong, that's just what the statistics say. 56% of single women say it's hard to find men who meet their expectation versus 35% of men. So men aren't getting married because women aren't meeting their expectations, right? Their main problem is, I don't feel comfortable even talking with women anymore because of the feminist movement. Let's just be honest. Because of the empowering of women, the empowering for them to let their voices be heard and voice their concerns, right? So you got men who are like, well, because of this lifting up of women and putting down of men, I don't feel comfortable talking to them. And then you have women, their main reason is men aren't meeting their expectations. And that's not across the board. That's for the women mostly, not so much with the guys. And of course, we could go into it, but I would just take a guess that a large part of that, maybe some of it's like height, right? Some other stuff, but expectations, let's be honest, a lot of that has to do with money and work. And there's more statistics that show this. I wasn't diving into it, but it doesn't take you long to realize and look at more polls that women will even they'll admit that they get these higher educations, they earn more money, and they want men to at least be at that level or higher. So now you've got women who essentially aren't dating because they've gone to school so much and they've started to earn money, and they want someone that earns more than them or has a higher education. So their expectations aren't being met because they've been lifted up and they want men to be above them. That idea of hypergamy that's talked about so much. And then men, for similar reasons, the way women have been lifted up and their opinion matters even more sometimes than the men and all that jazz. Now they're afraid to even approach, right, or talk to women. So, you can call me sexist. You can keep thinking that these young men out here are losers that aren't pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. But just realize that none of these are opinions. It's the current state of the world. It's a mess. This whole egalitarian feminist movement, treating women like they're afforded the same attention and the same empowerment that men have. You can argue if it's morally right, but what you can't argue is that it works. And what you can't argue is that it's not a complete and utter catastrophe, and it's gonna be the cause of our own destruction, quite literally. People aren't getting in relationships. People aren't dating. People aren't getting married. People aren't having kids till they're really late, and then they're not even having enough to keep their race going, to keep the human race alive. So yeah, it's been an utter failure, and you can't debate otherwise. You can't argue with the statistics, the current state of the world, and you can say all you want. You can still hound on the guys; they're used to it at this point, but it just doesn't work anymore because now you're made the fool. you're made the fool. You're made out to be the ignorant person, or even worse, if you knew about this, kind of like the evil person that just didn't pay any heed to it and just kept doing their own thing, right? And then we're waking up to it. We're breaking out of the matrix. We're starting to realize what's going on here. And it's pitiful, man. It's absolutely pitiful. And it's not young guys' faults, right? We're just coming of age. Especially if you're 20 and in your young 20s. I mean, we're just getting into that adulthood, right? But this has been going on since the 50s, right? And we weren't even alive through most of it. These were ideologies that were encouraged, that were tolerated, that were put up with by our parents' generation, Generation X, I guess it would be, or the boomers. This is their fault, largely. And I'm not picking on specific individuals, but I'm just saying as a generation, as a whole, right? And there's definitely outliers there. There's definitely people even listening to this right now that are like, you know what? I talked about this. I've seen this for years and I was against it. I fought against it. I was outspoken about it. And that's fantastic. And we want people like that, right? But yeah, and I mean, it's been in the church too. I've complained about it. I've talked about it to church leaders, to family, because I've grown up in the church. And, I was kind of made out to be, do you know what they're saying about you? Like, you're really rubbing people the wrong way. And it's like, that's how it is, man. You're a fool till you're proven right. And I was kind of a fool for a long time. And now I'm starting to realize that people are catching on. And if they're not catching on now, they're going to catch on real quick in the next few years. It's unavoidable. And they're going to be made out to be the evil person, the fool. And the church is going to fall apart, man. I'm saying right now. If it doesn't get its act together, if it doesn't change things, if it doesn't become a little bit more radical, if it doesn't flip the script, and just stop this bullshit on empowering women and, there's no difference between us. And then this cherry picking of scriptures, like we'll ignore these and we'll just, man, I could get into it, man, but it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. There's no excuse for it, man. There's no excuse for it. So, not the Christmas message I necessarily wanted to give, but I think it needed to be talked about. So yeah, Merry Christmas.